Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Sail Design Commission meeting. Today we're getting an initial briefing on the Elliot Bay Connections project. We're excited to have a presentation today. We had another item earlier in the day, so I'll dispense with a lot of the normal introductions, and maybe what we can do is start with introductions with the commissioners. And commissioners, if you can, when you introduce yourself, your role on the commission, and if there are any disclosures that are important to today's meeting, if you could like that. And then we'll start after that with our three presenters and then our guests. So, Ted, I'd like to introduce you.
Good afternoon, Kevin O'Neill. I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner.
Zubin Rao, one of the Architecture Commissioners.
Good afternoon, Brian Markham, Engineer position.
Hi, good afternoon, Adam Enright, Urban Planning Assistant.
Hello, Phoebe Bogert, Landscape Architecture Commission. Hi, I'm Jill Curry at Art Commission.
Hi, Kate Clark, the Art Commissioner.
And yes, Architect Commissioner.
Michael Jenkins. Jack, you wanna?
Yeah, maybe lead it off. First of all, welcome to the new commissioner.
Thank you.
You're here for the time of your life. When we were last here a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at Thomas Street. We were focused on missing link, right? And so we've got another missing link for you today, right? The Elliot Bay Connections project is an exciting project. It's fully private philanthropy funded by some well-known philanthropists. Probably read about it in the newspaper. The objective was that the current Central Waterfront project ends basically at the aquarium, and it's been a fabulous. As you've been out to Expedia and look at what Expedia did at their beach area out there, it's pretty amazing. But there's this vast stretch in the middle that has received too little attention over the last several decades. And so the plan here is quite unique. It's not to reimagine the space. It's just to try to restore it, to bring it back maybe to what its former glory might have been. But what the presentation you're going to see today doesn't involve lots of new design or new concepts. It's just largely, I think, to try to make up for a lot of deferred maintenance, and then obviously to deal with the long disused trolley line. Talk about when the project is over and it's delivered. We hope by the beginning of World Cup in June 2026. The philanthropists, the donors, will go away. There's no residual private interest. This is public land. It will remain public land, and the donors will set up a fund to assist for several years in the continued maintenance of the project. We're hoping this summer actually to work with the city on a longer-term maintenance agreement to ensure that the work we do stands the test of time. It's a little different. The project is different from what you see in a variety of respects. It's not a term permit. It's not a vacation. It's just a SIP. It's not a council action. We were just getting permits from SDOT to go make private improvements in the public right-of-way, but no retained ownership, as I said. And we'll be getting authorizations from the port, obviously. And it's different in that respect, because we have multiple jurisdictions involved, and you typically don't look at many multiple jurisdiction projects. We're working on the port land, but we're going to talk to you about the port land, and we're working on some SDOT, some parks land, and obviously interacting with King County, who has a little jewel piece there, CSO facility, and also with BNSF, the railroad you can never escape. So I'm going to hand it over right now to Laura, and she and Dave are going to walk through the presentation.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Rhodes, Principal and Landscape Architect with Walker BC. I'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm Dave Rogers, Principal Civil Engineer with MIT.
All right, Elliot Bay Connections. We did just want to begin with the land acknowledgement. I won't read the whole thing, but because we were working on the waterfront, we wanted to recognize the fact that we are situated on land of the Coast Salish peoples. They've resided here for ages and ages and continue to thrive. And I wanted to point out that beyond just acknowledging this fact, We're deliberately foregrounding Indigenous community and narrative on this project, and we actually have 3 Indigenous-led design firms on the team, and that includes an architect as well as Headwater People. We have Pauline Echohawk working with us, and Valerie Seagrass, who I think many of you have seen recently, went to help Monkey Solutions. The project team is listed here. It also, in addition to those 3 firms I just mentioned, includes designers who are working on waterfront park lighting and signage in particular. And that's significant because we really are all about creating a continuous experience that's very well stitched together along our entire downtown waterfront. I'm hiding some of my presentation for myself. Our general agenda, we'll talk about a little bit about vision for the project. We'll introduce you to the context we're working in, talk about the project goals, and then spend most of the time just kind of going through the project overview for both the Greenway and the 2 parks. This is the big vision and how our project, Elliot Bay Connection, fits into the central waterfront work. The components of this project are shown in green here. And so they include the bike and pedestrian greenway on Alaskan Way that connects Waterfront Park to Olympic Sculpture Park. They also include renovations to Myrtle, Edwards, and Centennial Parks to the north. And you can see the idea is really that this project will help bring people together by connecting, restoring, and revitalizing parks along the entire central Elliot Bay waterfront. This is the context we're working in. It ranges quite a bit. We have the beautifully designed waterfront park components that are under construction now. We have some sort of derelict lands and underutilized stretches of right-of-way along Alaskan at the Greenway. We have a very lovely and successful pocket beach at Olympic Sculpture Park. And then we have the 2 parks to the right, components of which are lovely to experience right now, and other areas could really use some extra love and some work. We also just wanted to talk sort of high level about our goals for the project, and we will do our best to tie these goals to the design improvements that we'll be talking about. Again, creating that continuous connected experience is key. We are responding directly to the public's desire for park amenities, and that especially includes restrooms and concessions. There's quite a long stretch here. As many of you know, it's not a lot of support in that regard. We really want to make the parks inviting and accessible to people of all ages and abilities. And that's not just sort of like a generic statement we're making. We've heard a lot of interest in making these parks especially appealing to and safe for kids, families, making sure that everyone has a reason to be here, making sure that the whole community of Seattle sees this as their waterfront, as a place to be. We're really focused on providing opportunities to touch the water and experience nature up close in the city. That's actually a theme that's been part of the general waterfront for many, many years now. It came out of early waterfront park planning, and it's something that we can really achieve in the parks. With our Indigenous consultants, really interested in deepening that connection to the Salish Sea and recognizing Indigenous people, the culture of this place. Not only is that the right thing to do, we think it enriches the project and can really lead to, a wonderful experience that's educational and interesting for everybody. And then finally, we would like to support habitat and environmental sustainability. Yes, we have some parks that exist today. They actually are almost all lawn and have relatively few native species in them. So we think there's a lot of room here for improvement. I won't dwell on the complexity of property ownership. This is why we have Jack sitting here with us. But the point is that the property ownership of the project is incredibly complex. It touches almost every city agency as well as the port with BNSF alongside. And I think the key thing for all of you to understand is that in spite of this complexity, we are really designing the whole stretch as a singular experience on one space. And we've been coordinating with all the agencies and permitting entities on the best way to go about that. A little bit of context. On the Greenway, it covers about 2 acres of land, 9 city blocks, crosses 6 streets, and we are taking out some of the trolley tracks that are there now, and rebuilding sidewalks. The Greenway is only, I can't tell in this diagram very well, so I just want to point out that it is only on the inland side of the street. Dave will talk about what's happening on the other side, but our project is inland, not on that waterfront side of Alaska. In the parks, Myrtle Edwards is 5 acres, Centennial Park's 11. We have 2 existing beach coves in pretty poor condition at Myrtle Edwards. We have restroom and concessions building the concessions building has been closed for a while in Centennial Park. And then the most known features of these parks, by far the best used, are the Elliot Bay Trail. And that really is a system of bike and pedestrian paths that many people, including people on our team, maybe some of you, used to commute through these parks. Just touch on some of the existing conditions along the Greenway. I think many of us and others, think of this as a bit of a slog. If you've ever walked the 3/4 of a mile, this is the condition you're walking along. That right image shows those trolley tracks that are King County right now, and those will be taken out and become part of the public right of way and access along the BNSF tracks to remain. The parks themselves have this spectacular setting. You get out to the water, you see the mountains, but there's not a lot going on. And many of their features are pretty old and really in need of improvement. We also wanted to touch on our community engagement process before we dive into design. The work we're going through right now is modeled on the process we would follow if this were a city project. We've done many projects with Seattle Parks, and we are doing all of the same things that we would be doing with a public agency. So that includes 3 touch points for feedback. There is a project website online, and we are doing webinars online where we are speaking, and we offer online surveys as well. Our first survey that happened this past fall had over 300 respondents, which is actually a pretty good turnout for just an introductory event, and there will be more coming this spring and summer.
Laura, our timing here is actually not coincidental, because as we're going into our outreach on the concept plan that you'll see, it was the perfect time to get your input as well, so that we can build it.
And we actually began as a project, and the team began outreach even before the design work kicked off last spring. The EBC group is connected to a wide range of constituent organizations, neighboring property owners, including our museum, basically everyone along this stretch we've been in coordination with. And as I mentioned earlier, we are considering community input, for the whole waterfront as relevant to these projects. A few of the things, kind of key takeaways we heard in the fall, just to put a pin on this, 70% of people who responded to our survey commute through these parks or commute the general route, but they don't spend time here. Like, they don't get off their bikes, which we just found really stunning in sort of what that says about these spaces. And then the reasons people provided are listed below. So no restrooms, no food, hard to access, so people aren't really coming here a lot, as a destination. No activities for kids. People thought there should be better seating out there, kind of more places to be. And some people expressed safety concerns about the way the trails function, and kind of the high speed of the bike trail, people wandering onto it. So moving into big picture vision, what we're aiming to do on our project. As I mentioned before, we think that right now people don't think of the Greenway or these parks as part of the waterfront or the downtown waterfront. They're sort of like the rest of the stuff over there to the north and be tucked behind the train tracks. So one of the things we're really trying to do is create very legible, very simple systems that begin down in Pioneer Square and will be legible and continuous all the way through our project. So I think the 3 most important elements there will be the separated bike and pedestrian trails that will really exist the whole way through. We have lighting, and we're actually looking at using the same approved fixture on Waterfront Park as we go north along the Greenway and into the parks. And we are looking at using the same signage systems. Now, there won't be as much signage, probably as we get into the parks, but we will be focused on signage that not only kind of directs you through the parks, but orients you to the rest of the city, like to neighborhoods outwards, to Seattle Center, to key destinations. As we think about those connections to the city, as I mentioned, people think about these spaces as relatively inaccessible, and to some degree, the parks are challenging to get to. But as we think about key entries, especially at, I guess there are a few I want to kind of just point out. At Lenora and Bell, we have elevators that take you up into Belltown. Very few people are aware of those, and I think the improvements that the Waterfront Park are doing make those more visible and more accessible, and so that creates better connections down to the Greenway. In the parks, we have the Thomas Street Bridge that connects over. So it's probably the best way out to the shoreline if you're at Seattle Center in particular, as well as the neighborhood. And we have one kind of side point of access that not many people know about, but where the old Amgen Bridge crosses 15th. There is actually a rapid ride station right there. There's a small public parking lot. So we have a great sort of direct point of entry there. The reason I highlight this is because we really can't create new entries. So we are trying to focus some significant improvements at these entries to really kind of mark these points, create a sense of arrival. And I'm going to hand this section to Dave to present the Greenway. And also take my.
So the Greenway plan basically is, as Laura said, is creating a continuation of experience of using similar lighting and signage so that there's a consistent feel from going from the Waterfront Park, great work that's going in right now, and connecting people to the water in the park system. Extends basically from Virginia to Broad. There is an existing rail system that's in there that is owned by King County and is a really important piece of public land that really isn't publicly accessible. So as an overarching goal is removal of that rail and repurposing that to the public benefit. And the public benefits for that are the movement of people on feet and on wheels, and for improving the existing trees and their growing conditions, and then providing more soil volume for new trees. We're working closely with the urban forestry group in order to specifically look at each tree along the alignment and what those opportunities are.
If you want to split, we can go to the next. When you want to flip.
Go ahead. So the space we have available is from the curb to the edge of the property line, or from the curb to where BNSF will allow us to develop. We are meeting with we've met with BNSF. We have an agreement with them. We have a meeting next week, and then we'll have an on-site review with the Federal Rail Association and with BNSF to look at the crossings, the existing crossings, and the configuration of our improvements at Wall, Vine, Clay, and we're currently not proposing a crossing at Broad due to the complexity of that area. So the elements of the right-of-way are quite simple, and the implementation of those in this tight area and in coordination with all the neighboring property owners is not a simple process. So we will be, as we're going through this process of design and permitting and coordination, we will be working in inches and feet in order to provide the most compelling long-term solution and connection from the waterfront to the park system. Actually, if you can go back one. So the Alaskan Way Safety Project, I don't know if you're aware of that. The SDOT obtained some federal dollars to construct a two-way cycle track on the west side of Alaskan Way. So we've been coordinating very closely with them, meeting every 2 weeks with that group. They will be providing a two-way cycle track from the Olympic Sculpture Park, connecting to the cycle track on the waterfront. And we're both SDOT and our design is presuming that that will be the commuter route for those 70% of the people that currently use this route. They get to and from work, they got a purpose, they're gonna move, along that alignment. And this project provides a different speed, a different experience, more park-like, and having a more compelling connection.
So the projects actually support each other. Excellent.
Exactly. So they have, the port was not supportive of that project especially during cruise ship sailing days, which is a little bit of a zoo down there. So through negotiations, they have a diagonal crossing at Wall, and full signal has been designed at Blanchard. They're going to be starting construction hopefully this fall for that project. The detour is extremely constrained from Wall to Bell. And with our project, as Jack mentioned, we have the opportunity to improve that detour. That detour will be in place as long as Pier 66 is in operation, and until such time as the seawall gets reconstructed on this section and there's a revisioning of the lasting thing. So we may not be around at that time, all of us collectively. So this is a really important project, and it's a really important connection for the long term until those future projects.
So you're saying those couple blocks, you become the bike path?
Yes.
The only one? And that's a permanent, not just on cruise ship days?
Just cruise ships.
For cruise ship days, they make those changes, those cut off. Okay,
That was the arrangement between the port and the city.
well, that's what I thought I read,
Yeah.
it was just on cruise ships.
It's on cruise ship days, and then it'll shift over.
And that's this year, I think that's about 12 days a month. So not insignificant, and it would only be for part of that day. So they would put up the traffic control. When they're done, they would take the traffic control down.
Is that automated or is it just somebody comes out?
That'll be Dave.
That'll be my retirement job.
Yeah.
And it's maybe worth pointing out, Dave, that this section, although it varies a little bit, as you move down the greenway, we are aiming for that consistent shared use path in the middle and a substantial green with new trees that will really provide wonderful character, shade, healthy plant material, which is not reflected. In the parks, as we move north, our project skips over the part of the work that was done by Olympic Sculpture Park and that beach. That is all in very good shape, and we will pick up again as we enter Myrtle Edwards Park, which is Seattle Park's property. What this plan shows highlights, I think, the fact that this is a renovation project. We are not reimagining or reconstructing 16 acres of park. We are really working with the structure of the park as it exists today and looking at where we can make improvements. And so this highlights some of those primary improvements. We're focused on the trails. So an improved bike trail with lighting along that back edge, an improved pedestrian path, which runs along the shoreline. Those paths remain primarily in the places they are today with some minor adjustments. And then those are sort of, there are these system-wide improvements of trails and landscape. And then we are also looking at improvements, as I mentioned earlier, at some of these key park entries that really do many things for us. We'll get into the details, but improvements around both the South Beach and North Beach area and their uplands areas really flank that Thomas Street Bridge arrival, so that when you come down that way, you feel like you're really arriving somewhere. The park itself offers you something in addition to the view. And as we move north into Centennial Park, in addition to sort of landscape improvements, including a great spot for picnic lawn with views of the greenery, which actually is quite fun to watch if you've got little kids. We are adding a public amenities building, and that replaces the concrete structures to the north right now that have restrooms, and concessions. That public amenities building is also something we're looking at having flexible kind of gathering space as part of that would be public and for the community.
And that's located at the kind of the pedestrian touchdown for the old Helix route.
Yes, thank you. So that's kind of a very important arrival point from that small parking and transit connection out, on the bridge out to 15. And so those are very important kind of focus areas of the park. And in addition, part of the project, but not being led by our team, we're looking at light projections on the grain terminal that actually build on work that was already done by a community group here in Seattle. There was a projection, I think, in 2018 that was quite successful. And the idea is that would just add to kind of putting this space on the map and make it a little bit more visible, more interesting from afar. To talk through our approach to some of the park elements. Again, we're in concept design, but we have actually based many of these improvements on pretty detailed analytical studies. We've looked at AASHTO guidelines, we have looked at park path accessibility and slopes kind of along the whole stretch. We've looked at sight lines and safety concerns, and we've done that with Meg and Dave here, has excellent bike safety knowledge and planning knowledge, and so that is all being folded into our plans. What you see on this diagram is that the bike trail and pedestrian paths remain separate, and we are making improvements that are really focused on safety, legibility of the trail system, and accessibility. In the darker tones, the dark orange and the dark purple, those are path sections we're looking at realignments for. And so that either fixes accessibility problems where we have slope issues, or it allows for some other site improvements, fixes issues of sort of like turns or intersections that aren't safe right now along those paths. Then for the rest of the paths, we are looking at repairing them as needed. That might be an overlay. Right now, the thought is both paths remain asphalt for that reason, so that we can just clean them up, make them accessible, make sure their cross slopes are good, and make them enjoyable to use. Some of the biggest safety concerns and sort of use concerns on the trails today result from either congestion or confusion about where you're supposed to be. And so in addition to better signage, we are looking at sort of a system that expands capacity on the trails. So on the bike trail, we would retain its current 12-foot width, but add a gravel shoulder that just provides a stopping point if you need to get off your bike, or if someone has wandered up this trail, there's a place where a pedestrian can get off to the side and doesn't get out of the way of the bike. On the pedestrian path, we're also looking at smaller gravel shoulders on either side. And the idea, the one on the left, is that might actually move back and forth into a refreshed landscape. These would provide places for faster movement, joggers, and others who really want to move through the park in a different way than people maybe moving slowly along that waterfront trail. I mentioned lighting earlier. We are looking at, as I mentioned, continuing that waterfront fixture all the way through the park. We will also be exploring the possibility of solar fixtures, hopefully that look very similar, so that we can deal with what Dave likes to refer to as a utility desert out here. Very hard to get utilities across tracks. But the idea and the rationale for lighting the bike trail and that back trail is that it keeps light away from the shoreline. That pedestrian trail really just hugs the water. We don't want to do anything that might be detrimental to habitat. And so this provides safe passage through the parks, and it provides safe passage for people moving at the highest speeds. For signage, we are working with Studio Matthews to transition their system of signage and just keep using it all the way along the greenway and into the parks. It may not have exactly the same mounting or all of the same signs that are needed in the waterfront, given the difference in context. But the style and the messaging will be consistent so that you, again, feel like you're on a connected waterfront. And their work will really fall into two main categories: wayfinding and then interpretive signage. There's actually a lot of interpretive signage in the parks today. Some of it's pretty interesting, but those stories could be told in much richer ways. And we're really excited to work with them and also Valerie Seagrass and our park partners on some of these themes. In terms of landscape, and by landscape I really do mean planting in this case, we have an arborist report. There's actually over 700 existing trees in the park, which is pretty interesting because parts of the park actually feel somewhat barren today. But the general idea is to retain those existing trees wherever possible. We will be planting new trees in some locations. And if we are looking at mitigation for any tree removals on the greenway, we're going to be looking sort of system-wide and treating this whole project together. The other core goal of the landscape plan is to really steward more diverse landscapes. As I mentioned, it is actually 94% lawn today, which is easy to mow and easy to take care of, but probably not what any of us would construct today along a shoreline if these were brand new parks. So we will be planting more native species. We will be restoring shorelines. And by that, we are generally staying above the riprap edge. It would unfortunately be cost prohibitive to really deconstruct most of that edge. But we can do a lot to plant along it with native species, provide overhanging vegetation, and make it more resilient to sea level rise.
Laura, it's probably worth pointing out that in all this work, we're trying to reverse engineer the O&M piece at the same time. We've got a consultant team on board to help us in the plant selection and the layout and everything so that we can achieve, a logical and hopefully sort of minimize long-term costs.
Yes, that is a great point. These are just some examples of the landscape typologies that we'll be including in the park. Where we have lawns that are large and well used for gathering, we will keep them as lawns and restore them where needed. That's especially true in those large spaces down in Myrtle Edwards Park. In some cases, we may be elevating those lawns or looking at regrading, again, just to get very low-lying areas out of floodable zones in the park. In addition, we are building on the SPR practice to maintain pollinator lawns in areas where there's lawn, but it's not a logical gathering place, it's lesser used. We can do a lot in those spaces to really make them more interesting and support habitat. And then in some of those special places in the park, I referenced, especially the beaches and the area around the building, we're looking at meadow planting, either native beach grass or native upland meadow that could include indigenous planting, culturally significant species. The shoreline planting I mentioned, this is actually an example of a port installation where they have planted some native species along the top of their bank to support the stability of that area. And then we will be doing a lot to really buffer the backside of the park. In some cases it has a buffer, but it's sort of just a traditional thin line of evergreens and it's spotty. And so that whole backside of the park can get, we think, a lot greener to kind of orient you out towards the water. At the beaches, just following on the landscape and planting theme, we are looking to precedents along the whole waterfront. Pioneer Square Habitat Beach, which was constructed as part of the waterfront park, has been very successful. It's amazing the animals you now see frequenting that beach. And of course, it provides a place to touch the water. Olympic Sculpture Park Beach, again, terrific precedent. We have Anchor QEA on our team, and they are working with us on a coastal study as well as the engineering of the beaches in our project. And they work on both of these, so we're familiar with permitting and habitat considerations. And then Expedia Beach is not really a true beach. It's completely upland, but we include it here as a precedent, one, because it ends our park experience, And two, because we think it's exceptionally beautiful. It is all native, and I think it's an example of what you can do with native species, but still have a designed landscape that's very intentional. So at our 2 beaches, we will be making improvements at the beaches themselves that are aimed at habitat as well as human access to those beaches. Right now, they're sort of very steep and they drop off. They're full of debris. They're very difficult to access, and they're actually very small. And so one of the things that we believe is of value and actually, again, supports Indigenous design themes and interests is expanding those beaches, expanding the shallow gravel area for salmon habitat, and then adding native plants all around them. The idea here is that the 2 beaches have very different characters, and so that you experience different things in these parks. The one to the south is actually sort of tucked up against an existing art installation by Laura Haddad, which will remain. There's also a CSO facility owned by King County there that, again, could probably use some screening and better integration with the park. And so we see this as a really great opportunity to plant trees and native species and just create a little enclosure and a stronger sense of place. Well, we would be, I think, referring to Olympic sculpture at Park Beach quite a bit in the creation of this beach. At the north end, we are looking at a much more open character where you have those wonderful views out to the mountains and the sounds. And we see this as a really great gathering place and a family-oriented place. And so in addition to the meadow landscape that's around the beach, we are proposing an interpretive play area here. And we'd also have picnic tables on the lawn and other seating integrated into this space so that it really can be a family destination in these parks. These are examples of the types of play that we are interested in integrating. We're not talking about a traditional playground because of the shoreline environment. We think it's really important that whatever we do has a very natural feel and that it's interpretive and really celebrates the stories that we're expressing throughout the park with Valerie, Indigenous design consultants. And so we are actually going to be getting into this quite a bit with SPR and talking about ideas. But the general idea is that it's exploratory, it's natural, it's kind of a mix of experiences. We're also adding an exercise zone to replace some pretty old exercise equipment that's in the port property today. But it's very, very well used. So we think it's an important feature to provide. And then moving north onto port property, the public amenities building that we mentioned earlier, again, is located at near the bridge at this other entry point. The idea is that it frames views out to the water and really reaches out in general to that greater landscape. It replaces the buildings that are currently right here at the base of the fishing pier. And one thing we get by moving the buildings south is the opportunity to really integrate it into a park setting, let it create space in front of it, and create a much safer trail system moving through the park. If any of you biked or walked around those buildings at the fishing pier, you know there's some pretty blind corners and pretty dicey circulation. The building here also will support the future fishing pier when it is ultimately improved. Washington Fish and Wildlife has started a process that looks at demolishing the pier today and reconstructing it. In terms of building program and goals, again, we are responding to the top ask from the public, which is restrooms and concessions. People really, really want that function back in the park and in a way that's comfortable. We're replacing those cinder block structures, relocating it, and then creating a destination in the northern half of the park. And I didn't linger on that before, but probably should. We've got 2 miles of green shoreline and not a lot of people venture the whole way. Most people don't even know that there's this lovely beach at Expedia at the end now, or a parking garage, right? There's a public parking garage on the corner too. And so part of the strategy of this renovation is to add amenities like this that will draw people further along the shoreline and let people experience all of these parks. In terms of building program, we're looking at gender neutral restrooms. So that would be a change from what's there now. They're more traditional restrooms right now. We are looking at a concessions program of some sort. This is not a restaurant, not a full-fledged dining establishment, something where you can just, buy probably pre-made food and drinks at a counter. Outdoor seating associated with that, and then potential flex space inside. And we're really exploring a wide range of options of what that flex space could be and how big it is. This building shown here, although it's hardlined, it may shrink. Parts of it may actually become open with just a roof covering it, but we're looking at space that could be used for community events, possibly tribal events, and inside might have elements that are educational or really express some of those themes around Indigenous history and culture and the environment. I should have said before too that you can see their logo at the bottom, but the architect we have working with us who is designing this work is Formline Architecture and Urbanism out of Vancouver, BC. Alfred Waugh is an absolutely incredible and inspired designer, and his entire focus for his firm is working on projects with tribes and Indigenous themes, both in the Pacific Northwest as well as throughout Canada. On this building, he's been working with Valerie and Colleen Echohawk and really thinking about Coast Salish inspiration in particular. And is beginning to look at traditional longhouse structures and how that might influence this building. It's also a building system that allows for quite a bit of flexibility in terms of openness or enclosure. And then the gesture this building makes, kind of reaching outward and upward to the sky, is key. That is all about reaching out to the sea and creating a gathering space in front of it. So whatever the program here becomes or the scale, those two things are really important to this project. So that gets us all the way to the north end of our project. We kind of went south to north. And we just wanted to end here and answer a question Michael asked me when I came in about where we are in design.
Oh.
So we are early in concept design. We've actually really only been working for a few months now. There will be these 2 more periods of public input in the spring and summer. And then this fall, we move into more technical documentation and construction documents. Construction will overlap with the completion of documentation, and the work on the greenway and the parks may be phased. But we are clearly in construction as early as we can be in order to be open in time for the World Cup. We were chatting about and so with that,
That's it.
I don't know if you have any final comments.
I
now,
don't
but
know, we're just
an overview of our work.
look forward to your questions and thoughts.
Thank you. Normally we always want to have time for public comment, and there's some very familiar faces attending online, so I'll look for those that want to raise their hand to make a comment. We have a couple of guests today. Leslie or Tim, is there anything you want to add?
Observing.
You probably already know who Tim is. I'm Leslie Koch and I represent the donors.
Thank you.
I'm Mike Johnson. I'm with Office for Waterfront Technical Design. Just watch it and keep track.
Normally because this is a briefing, it's as you're working towards a more formal review that we would normally do with a capital project at concept level. We're a little early and we'll figure out what the future looks like for that. So because it's a briefing, it might lend itself to a little more informal, not formal questions and formal comments. So maybe we can dispense with that a bit. Adam is going to be leading that for us today. I don't know if you want to kick us off with any ideas around how to organize question and comment, or commissioners, obviously you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you for the presentation. I think Michael said it. Yeah, let's do combined question and comments. I thought you had a couple of kind of vision statements that I thought were really something that we can maybe help track through and ask questions around. One was around the kind of continuous connected experience. And so I think that's a great area for discussion. As well as a lot of your work, and you mentioned this in your vision about inviting and accessible and all ages and abilities. And so I think that's another area that we can kind of focus on as a commission. And then you had mentioned kind of 3 elements around like paths and trails, lighting and signage. So I think those are other areas. And then I guess the third piece that you really focused on, I guess third and fourth, were both the landscape systems and types, which I think are really interesting, as well as kind of a series of structures and amenities that go through the project. So I don't know, that's like 7 themes, but those were kind of the key things that I heard in terms of what we can discuss around. And then I think maybe we'll start with, I guess, Ben this time. If you all want to make questions or comments, I'll try to summarize into some recommendations at the end.
First of all, I would just like to thank the donors for what a wonderful gift to improve this part of our city. So I'd like to say I run along that trail a lot, but I more stumble, shuffle along it. So I'm very familiar with the gaps in between from down the waterfront up to basically out to I didn't even know it was called the Expedia Beach. Yes, we just had a presentation this morning on Garfield High School, and they were Garfield Superlock, and they had this idea for a parkour park. And I was just wondering, I wouldn't want like it wouldn't have to be focused on that, but we were showing this play structures there. I was wondering if like there would be an opportunity to do something like that. And I love that it's not bright yellow plastic, whatever play equipment. I also think kids think it's more fun. Like the pictures you showed are what I think playgrounds should be. So I love it. Just an idea. There's Parkour Visions, I think, was the group that was doing that. And then there's a building. Are you removing one of the buildings that's out there? You're removing that,
Yes.
putting that into, okay.
Yes, we are removing those concrete,
There's 3 buildings there.
the concrete buildings that are right in this picture on the right here.
Yeah.
Those are coming out.
On the right, and then what about the one on the left?
The one on the left, no, that remains because that's the King County CSO
Okay.
facility.
Gotcha.
But we will be trying to screen it better and integrate it.
I love that there will be restrooms at the far end. I always think that should be also. I don't know if there's anything. I'm sure money's an issue and probably a lot of other things, but it seems like a great place for a restroom because not everyone makes it all the way down to the end, and it's kind of long way. And then in the summertime when the cruise ship terminals arrive, I know you have multiple pathways there, but they all get crowded. So like when you're riding your bike, there's people walking on it, and then when you're trying to run, there's people, so it's all. So I don't know if there's like maybe that's part of your signage or wayfinding kind of piece to try to keep people separated. I know that they try to do that, but that would be and you mentioned the running path. If there was like some signage that suggested that was more for running or something. Anyway, I just would like to thank you guys again. I think it's wonderful. I'm really excited about the connection too along the to the park. Actually, that section is really exciting.
Ben, one of the interesting things about the balance we're trying to strike here with the shoreline regulations is unlike the central waterfront, which is intended to be an active, busy place, the shoreline regulations up here suggest that this should be really a passive park.
Yeah.
So
Less active.
there is that exercise equipment that exists. this that we're, it's not a parkour course, but it does get used, we're gonna fix up. And it's actually, we're gonna have to work to get that kids play area in, right? It's, so I just mentioned that there's a kind of little pushback as we get into some of the more active stuff, but, your point's well taken.
I should mention too that my 10-year-old son asked me the exact same question last week. He said, "Why don't you design a park with a parkboard?"
That's how cool you are.
Yeah. The 10-year-old, a lot of times.
Never get your.
No. I think that idea of informal exercise and play that integrates natural features and isn't structured, like it's not a slide that you have to just go down the slide, is something that we believe in and want to explore.
It can kind of disappear more almost, so it's not.
Right.
It's also maybe worth noting that we explored the idea of a restroom in Myrtle Edwards. It's certainly come up before. It is a utility desert, but there may be a future potential collaboration that's possible with King County and parks on that one.
That's gonna stick, Dave.
That's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. Yeah, just to echo, it's wonderful to see the spine of our waterfront being built to what it used to be. And I want to commend you all for particularly having so many Indigenous design consultants on the project. And it's not something that you come across very often where there is such a robust Indigenous design led team. And so I'm wondering also on the outreach side of it, what conversations have taken place with Coast Salish tribes? Because this is a privately funded project, there is the benefit of not having to do government to government. So particularly curious about what outreach has been with the Duwamish tribe, who are literally a canoe journey away on the opposite side of the water. So if you could just tell me a little bit about what those discussions have been like for design.
I can start that off if you want. When we were last year sort of sitting down and thinking about outreach, obviously part of it was the design team and how we incorporate that, as you mentioned, but we spent a significant amount of time with both the Suquamish and the Muckleshoot. I don't know that we've touched the Duwamish specifically yet, but that's, we're still in the outreach process. Leonard Forsman, who's the chair of the Suquamish, was part of our early group and actually showed up at the kickoff with some of the donors last summer, which was fun. So we've been, continuing to consult and working with Colleen. We've been kind of taking her lead too. Obviously, she's deeply tied into to all of these communities. So, but we'll make a note of that to make sure.
For outreach to the Duwamish.
Yeah.
Great. And I think that one thing we're trying to do is, and this is coming from Colleen and from Valerie, who's a Muckleshoot tribal member, is create space that sort of brings everyone together, and doesn't it's not focused on the tribes that have formal, it's sort of everybody, right? Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Suquamish, what are the themes that are unifying, as opposed to sort of being, forced through those government to government relationships. That said, the port also has excellent relationships, on the, formal relationships to the tribes, and we're in regular conversation with them. And so,
As does the city.
yes, as a city. But just because of the building and the fishing pier at that end, they're speaking regularly. And so we expect all of that to continue throughout this project.
Great, yeah. I definitely recommend that outreach to the Duwamish since they're so proximate to this location. I also was curious, since, of course, with the waterfront plan, there was an associated art plan with that. Is there an art plan associated with this project?
There is no new art proposed, but we are in touch with the artists. So we've spoken to Laura Haddad. We also are in touch with someone who can reach out to Michael Heiser about his piece. And then there is a totem pole as well that's art. And so those three pieces of art will remain in place. We will restore them if needed. It's probably minor restoration, but they're actually pretty significant features in the parks that we certainly want to honor and respect. And so the beginnings of those conversations and those inroads have been made.
You also mentioned projections on the Terminal 6 Brain facility. Could you talk more about that?
Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. As you mentioned, there was you've seen other cities, right, where the projections have been done. And there was a kind of a pilot done about 6 years ago on the terminals, but then pandemic intervened and, nothing ever came. So the port obviously is involved, and we have a tenant there as well, and we're in conversations with the port's tenant who operates the terminal, because we need their consent to project something on it. I don't know, but I think we assume we do. So so that's going to be the next part of the process. And in fact, I think part of our team was actually just out there yesterday inspecting the terminal, trying to figure out some of the dimensions, and we're working on kind of what's the projection ratio. All that.
So it would be continuous at nighttime, or what's?
Not TBD. I don't think, I mean, we've got to think about fish too, right? And we're going to have to talk to the neighborhood, right? And there's going to be a lot of stakeholders, but I don't think that there's not a program yet. I think first we're just trying to figure out, can we get people lined up together and say it's something worth looking at, right? And it's kind of dramatic, right?
Right, yeah, it's a great surface.
Yeah, no, it's a
Hopefully
fabulous
in the
surface.
70s,
Right.
the Seattle Design Commission wanted to maintain the concrete color. So it's changed in terms of, there's a great.
Yeah, no, it's a blank palette, right? Yeah.
So thinking about, projections are great ways to activate spaces, but particularly in dense urban environments.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming this is a space that's most of the time populated during the day. So I am wondering about programming on that surface that maybe considering, I know it's not your property, it's the port's property, but encouraging, with that surface, painted treatment is more appropriate. I know I'm not the first one to suggest that. A stranger wrote about it too. But just thinking about it, it is a great opportunity, but what type of cultural programming is being introduced that's appropriate to the site of when most people are there?
Right.
And then one last question about the public amenities building. Who is going to facilitate it? Who is the handoff to? Who manages that? Who gets to program it?
That is all under discussion right now. It will be property, so fundamentally, they're the people we'll be working with first on that. But there's potential partnerships.
I think
And we're just very early. We're not trying to avoid the question. It's just very, very early in design, and we have put big kind of ideas out there that we think would be wonderful for the space. And we'll be working through those questions around operations and programming and maintenance as we go forward.
Part of it is, you throw great ideas out like that and then try to develop enthusiasm with your partners, right? Make your partners get enthusiastic, and it's easier to. So we're spending a lot of time trying to build enthusiasm, and it's working, I think. But the operational, it would be taking on an operational obligation, right? At the institutional level, we have to figure out how that works. It could be something that gets built into our maintenance, our O&M conversations, which haven't started yet, but which will later this year. So, but we'll make a note of it for sure.
Kate, I want to follow up what you said, because I think this projection is probably a design-led effort right now, not seen as an artist opportunity. And once the infrastructure is in place, you could create an opportunity for artists to project there, or if you decide to paint it. So that would be a way to expand into some additional art opportunities, which I think is where you may be trying to get to.
Yeah.
So, and I think I read that the first 10 years of maintenance is supported
Yeah, and we'll work on that agreement, but there's a kind of baseline budget that the city and the port have had to maintain the space. And so we want to have a commitment that that will continue. And then in terms of the new elements and improvements that are being added or enhanced, that we would provide a sum of money to kind of take care of those. So for 10 years.
Can we go back to the train crossings, because I got lost in that particular stuff? Because why did you cross any train track? Aren't you just running parallel to them?
Extremely good question. So
Was it confusing?
these,
I mean,
these are at-grade crossings in an urban environment. And what the trains typically do will blow the horn. And there's a term called quiet crossings, where the city and the residents of the neighborhood have requested BNSF. You request of BNSF to not blow their horns, so that people aren't woken up, 24 hours a day, and it doesn't disturb the businesses that are there. So with that, there's an interconnect of the signals and the crossing equipment that's there that tells the system if a car is on the tracks or if a car is within the guards. What we're requesting, those guards are set up for the King County trolley. We're pulling those tracks out, and we want to move the guard over to capture that space for the pedestrians and bikes.
but you're still just running parallel to the tracks. It's the cars that are crossing.
That is correct.
Okay, that's the part that I got.
Yeah,
off my night.
and with the relocation of the guard
Yes, I guess.
and how close we can get to the BNSF tracks will provide us a guideline of what space we have available to design.
If you have to net down or something to get across the street. And then you say you don't recommend that broad, that confuses me too. So where are you going? So
At Broad Street, there is a non-traditional corner as you go from Alaskan to Broad, let's say. And that crossing has, through decades of negotiation with Seattle Department of Transportation, the City of Seattle, and BNSF, has a certain configuration that is non-standard, and that is a special approval. With that, the interconnect at that corner is tied up the hill for Broad Street intersection with Elliot, and backwards with Clay. And with that, a pedestrian at that corner, you don't have, with the geometry that's there, you don't have line of sight to cars that are approaching that intersection. So in the event that a cyclist or a pedestrian decides to go against the light, the car can't see that person making that decision.
Yes.
So the direction we've been getting from SDOT too. I mean, it's,
But you're still gonna cross that street as it curves around.
So at Clay, we will be working with Seattle Department of Transportation on having, adding bike boxes and clear
Dedicated lights.
It would be using the light cycle for the pedestrians, but it would be in a parallel. It's similar to the 5-way intersection at Terminal 5.
So if I'm northbound, I will be able to cross into my road.
oh yeah.
And you will do it without reinventing all the other things that you were talking
That is correct.
about. I think
Kind of cookie.
yeah. Now, Dave, utility deserts become activation deserts. So you gotta haul some utilities down there in where weather is, so that people can put up booths for things. I mean, what's the plan here?
Jill, that sort of gets back to my point about the nature of this park and what we can do for, and part of it is, it's intended to be a passive space, number one. And number two, as I said at the beginning, we got some money, but we don't have an unlimited amount of money, and this is going to be very expensive. And so our approach is not to reinvent the space or to create something new there, but to kind of fix what we see.
So for to your point, for the Parks Department, we did a briefing, a similar briefing for them. And we're developing the options that are available in order to get utilities to the site. So we're drawing up a schematic drawing. And the ways to get utilities to the site are directionally drilling underneath 10 BNSF tracks to Elliot, and technically you can do it. We like to say yes, and yes, you can get utilities to the site. And the other option is basically ripping up the existing pathway all the way out to the corner of Broad and pulling electrical duct bank, water main, and ironically, the sewer pump station that's there. We're in communication with King County. There's no gravity connection outside of their building. So as Laura said, one of the asks we're gonna have of them in the long term is if you're expanding your pump station, can you work with Seattle Parks and Recreation in order to provide a restroom that has an internal sewer connection to the pump station?
And just anything you can do will make the future activation, because what makes things safe is that they're activated. So it'd be a shame to miss the opportunity to push the envelope.
And on the range of that, the other thing that we've been asked to look at are interim restroom facilities. Everything on the spectrum to, we can get domestic water there, but not waste. How large are those tanks? How frequently do you have to pump them out?
Right.
And then assess that in coordination with the city.
Even some outlets in your light poles make more things possible. So, anything you can do. And then my last question is the north end. For years I came in and out from the north end, so I want to make sure it gets some love. So how does this really end at the north?
Plan here. Good.
Expedia kind of completed the north end.
Right, so you're just tying into that.
We're just tying into
Yeah,
that.
we tie in. So we will improve the landscape all the way, like kind of just past the fishing pier. Some of those, with those concrete buildings that come out, we'll be continuing lighting, signage, trail improvements, landscape improvements. I think we're just especially looking at pollinator lawns at north end. And the idea is then we just dip seamlessly into the Expedia Beach improvements. And so those improvements actually are at the corner, and then they move south. I know it's very small here on the plan, but they do end kind of like right here where our plan ends. And so that landscape is a lot of grasses, a lot of rock, and like much nicer trails. And so we will be meeting there.
So
That's all on private property, right?
Right.
The Expedia owns all that.
in the interest of making this more accessible to all, is there a way that the signage plan can continue to Gaylor Street? Is there a way the signage plan can continue to as you get closer to the cruise ship?
That's a good idea.
Because
Very good idea.
Because really,
Yeah.
it's just about finding it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the public parking garage, you say is, boy, that's a big old secret, right? So,
You could probably communicate with someone related to Expedia.
so that would be a request at the north end, the signage, to
Yeah,
find a
that's a great
way to
idea.
have access. I understand the improvements.
That's a great idea.
Let's see, where did we go? I think where I was going with my questions, which I wanted to say, I think it's incredibly clear how you really are treating the park, right? And the whole extent and again, a systems approach from north to south. I think it's elegant, it makes a lot of sense, and it gives you a lot of flexibility to continue to develop these ideas. So I think there's really kind of no flies on it. I think it works really well. My concerns are just kind of quintessential to the area, which is it's a place that's a little bit lost. I do believe that once you are creating new infrastructure and improving, you are going to bring more people there. I think perhaps the coincidental opening with the World Cup, and that kind of publicity and that kind of connectivity is going to help, and that probably kind of keeps it in perpetuity, kind of the eyes on that place. So I suppose my question, or what I was wanting to see when I looked at this for your presentation, and I think I'm still wanting for it, is where are those other points? Because I understand the north-south, and you're making the point on the north, and I understand it from the south, but where are the east-west connections, and how are you edifying and proclaiming those places where people can get in? Are there, I just don't even know. I mean, quite honestly, like when I've been there, and I grew up here, and I never went here until I worked on the waterfront, and then I was like, oh my God, I can take a run at lunch, and I can go north, and I see all these, but I do run. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's like one of those things. Like, and so I never even looked left. I looked left. I didn't look right, or vice versa. And so, how are you pulling people in from the city, right? And when we talk about talking to the neighborhoods are weird in there. Is there a neighborhood? Who is the constituents? And you said 70% of the respondents or passers through, and that's and that's the reality, and that's okay. But how do you start to make it that people make it a destination? I mean, I look at this and I was like, I live on the north end now. I grew up in the central area, but when I live on the north end, my beach is Golden Gardens, right? And so, like, how can it be? And this has the potential to do that kind of thing for the central city, right? It's incredible. So how do we get there? And it's just kind of part of the work of this project to start making that visible.
I think it's a really great question, because really there are only 2 east-west points of access right now, and I mean the Thomas Street Bridge, if you happen upon it, then you get what it does. But I think a lot of people still don't really know about it. And then certainly the connection to the north and the Amgen Bridge, that is not legible. And so because we are working with all of the city agencies and this city leadership partnership here, maybe there is signage that that looks sort of beyond the limits of the project.
And part of this, frankly, is we're continuing to work with Tim left, so I can say this now, is that
We're still recording.
Okay. I mean,
He won't walk.
this is, yeah, right. I mean, this is a public facility, right? And so we're talking to our partners at Parks, right? And ESCOT, and maybe this is the longer conversation about how do you do this? Because it's a great point.
I think you should go talk to the Uptown Alliance. They were the advocates for the Thomas Street Towpath.
Yeah,
And
good idea.
They would love to, knowing them, they would
Right.
love to take on how to make this part of their neighborhood.
Right.
This is their neighborhood beach.
Right.
Because you're right, I know it was there because I work with them.
Right.
But it has Uptown, this is their neighborhood.
Right. This was a big part of the conversation, 10 years ago when we were starting on the waterfront. The question came up, like, how is this linear facility connecting anything? And then we were doing the over the walk, and then we did the Pine improvements and down Pioneer Square. They had a bigger budget than we do, but it's it's an important question.
I had a really kind of landscape relevant thought. I was I drive down 15th every day now, and for the past 2 years I've been doing this. And I've obviously been working on this project for a while. It was not until this week where I suddenly realized that you have a perfect view into Myrtle Edwards at a point I'd never noticed before. And it's because everyone's in their car. It's like, there's a little lighthouse. I can see it right here. And I had never noticed that before. And it did make me think that if we give the park itself a little more stature, like some bigger trees and sense of place, that maybe there are actually lots of places where you can see out to it from 15th, but because it's lawn and because it's so dwarfed, even the plants are so dwarfed by the industrial setting and the commercial setting, maybe if we amp up the park, it will also sort of pull people in. But yeah, the signage and the access to those points is a really great question.
And PB, looking back at the 2014 Bike Master Plan and the dashed lines that are on that plan that Kevin was leading, you look at what implementation has happened, and those pieces are now being finalized to the Thomas Street overpass. So there are now a protected connection from the 2nd Avenue bike lane to the Thomas Street Bridge. It has been done section by section to no grand fanfare, And when you ride in that area and there's no bike facilities, there's a 2014 plan with a dashed line, you don't go back unless you know about it. So the other connections, Lenora, you used to have to get to that overpass by going under the viaduct. And the viaduct was super low, it's probably like 12 feet high at that point. That is now gone, and there's a really nice intersection with protected bike lanes that connect to the Lenora overpass. Office of the Waterfront has a great project moving forward with the Bell Street connection, connecting Bell Street. Laura worked on the Lake to Bay, and so all of these plans, there's also a trail upgrade plan that we worked on that we're going to be able to implement. So there's these great plans out there that all of those things are coming to fruition.
And then how do they come back to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting.
Cool. Skipped.
Yeah.
I might go in many different directions, and I think I see a common thread. And I can't be more excited about this project, though. Right, like we tore down the viaduct. We're finally going to get our waterfront. I totally agree that waterfront, to almost everybody I know, has defined almost the piers area, and there's this dead area that is disconnected from the park, which is also waterfront, but those are two different things. And I'm really excited, probably primarily for that connection between the two. I correlate this a lot to like Hudson River Park in New York, Manhattan, which I was very happily in your seat, Laura, on that project. But we got to stitch a lower Manhattan park with an upper Manhattan park. And it was sort of a through park, right? It had a lot of that definition of people just use it to get from A to B, and they don't actually do it. But once we connected it, the neighborhoods change, the usage of those parks change, the tax revenue of the adjacent properties change, and I would love you to not underplay that. People near a park, their values of their properties will go up. Tax revenue will go up.
South
We'll have
Chicago,
more.
right?
Highline in New York is entirely funded on tax revenue from the adjacent properties.
And Millennium created a new neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So I think you are doing more than just the donor's value, and I would encourage you to try and capture some of that. Right. Like I like the ideas of the fishing pier as a future thing. We built Little Island as an extension to our Hudson River Park, and that came from a separate donor, but it was more public space, more ways to activate that same park. I think there's an incredible amount of opportunity right here. This is Seattle's like doorstep, right? So don't undercut. I think tying it to the neighborhoods is difficult.
Yep.
Thomas Street Bridge, I didn't know about it, right? And I run on this all the time.
Another road.
Excuse me, I'm from Minnesota, so I rollerblade, but probably past both of you guys. But it's how do we cross those tracks? I think you kind of don't. I think you have A to B. But activating Lenora Bell, fine, right? That's where you're going to get your real connection. I'm really excited about that. I'd love for some of your signage to teach us about our mistakes of viaducts and junking up the waterfront. And look what we learned. If you're standing here, this is what your view would have been. Now it's beautiful, right? let's make sure future generations don't ever get short-sighted again and put up viaducts on their waterfront, right?
Or coal gasification plants, you know, there's one right, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
right down there by
Yeah.
the studio.
I think there's, to that end, Highline left a lot of the actual old railways. Maybe there's a version of that here in terms of not all the trolley tracks need to be pulled up, but they can be, a section of it is historic. This used to be the trolley in their space. It can also be a lesson. I'd love to see something like that. I do have a challenge that Helix Bridge doesn't actually cross Elliot. So I don't necessarily think of that as a entrance.
We did, you know, when did Expedia, we did install a new signal there. And it's actually, it's used a fair amount.
It's used, but once you cross Elliot, you're also just at
Rapid Ride.
Pep Boys and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
there's really not
You can't get up the hill.
It's not a neighborhood.
it's not a neighborhood. So I think the new Sound Transit station at Republican is going to actually probably be a midpoint. There won't be a bridge, but maybe we can talk to different parties about doing something like that. There is conversation about the Gaylor station.
Right.
There's actually conversation currently about a station directly across from the grain silos as a compromise, right? And I think that would activate the Helix Bridge, would activate your park, would like, oh my God, the opportunities come up and to get that to tie to Queen Anne Hill in that neighborhood is huge. So maybe I'd ask you to be more public in your plan so that other agencies who are
React to it.
thinking of will say, ooh, there's an amenity there that I want to tie to. If you guys are going first, you get to pull people along, and that's really exciting. Oh my God. I think this is like if you build it, it will come moment, right? So don't get lost in doing everything for the sake of doing something.
Yeah.
Because I think wedding venue will come, right? Like the pier will come, all of these things. Make your building as flexible as you can for these like communal opportunities. But don't like make it perfect and then not make it okay. Make the park perfect, and the rest of the stuff will come. That's my like, yeah. And I love like the Oregon Beach, Peninsula Beach look. Like our beaches are too manicured here. Bring back those huge trees, things for the kids to climb on. That's my version of parkour. It is, yeah, that's enough.
That's good.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just, I really love the kind of spirit with which you're approaching the project. You know, and that's partially by, you know, code-driven, partially budget-driven, but I think obviously also a design philosophy. You know, I think for me, my biggest worry for this is that it would become over-programmed. So maybe a little bit contradictory to some of the comments, but you know, I think like when I come down Thomas Street Bridge and it's, you know, it's kind of this ecological wasteland, right? Like it's totally inappropriate. It's got the turf grass and lollipop trees, but it's got that like Heiser art piece, which I really love that thing. But there's despite all those shortcomings, I like that you're kind of arriving in this mostly empty, forgotten space, you know, and there's so much activity behind you in the city. And kind of coming to this space that's like very flat and empty and open is kind of magical just on its own. And so I guess I would just look for, you you know, just try to find that balance as you kind of keep working through the design. Like I love the plan, I love the approach. But I'm curious about what it looks like in section, like you talked about, maybe there are some taller elements. I'm not sure, you know, I don't know. And I guess I kind of had a question about like what would this particular shoreline have looked like redevelopment? Was it dense fir trees like all the way up?
All mud flats.
All mud flats.
Maybe it's worth noting that this is, the parks are built on fill from my
Yeah,
side.
Yeah,
But
but that,
it
it's
would
your
have
point
been, yeah.
about what was the history?
Yeah.
It would have been mud flats and bluffs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like the openness is appropriate, you know, and I get that you're not touching the shoreline except at the beaches and stuff like that, but yeah, I would just kind of, you know, I really love the spirit of restoration, you know, it's like how do we take care of these old urban spaces, you know, we're not trying to put something new in, you know, we're trying to like take care of it and allow it to be what it has been and, you know, kind of have those traces of what was there before. So yeah, I just love the spirit of it. Please don't overprogram it, you know, just keep it, like I love the images of play structures. I would hate to see like some plastic slide out there, you know.
Yeah, that isn't gonna happen.
Obviously, you know, if you could get rid of the gym equipment, that would be awesome. But like, you know, I really just love the spirit that you're approaching it with. You know, it's not like a full-on habitat restoration, but it's also not expedient, right? So, yeah, just keep going. It's awesome.
Right.
So this is really exciting, and I'm really glad we have a chance to review it, not just today, but down the road. And it is a missing link, Jack. I mean, I used that term this morning.
Yeah.
So I guess you get all the missing link projects. I wish you would take on the other missing link projects. Right? That's another topic. But yeah, I'm really struck by the conversation about sort of the activation versus sort of keep it natural. And I'm kind of more with where Zubin is. I mean, but if it makes you feel better, I haven't run since like the last millennium probably, but I have biked this dozens, if not hundreds of times, but as a recreation rider, it wasn't part of my commute. But I bike it all the time because I love it. In part because it feels really different than almost any other part of the city, you know, and so my first question is, will this require a shoreline permit? I'm assuming it will, and I mean, to your point, I think that kind of leads you to more of a natural,
Definitely does.
you know, I mean, that's just where the State Shoreline Management Act takes you, right? So, I mean, that is a factor that has to be considered here. I was really struck by Phoebe's comments because, I mean, I think the Thomas Street overpass is an amazing piece of infrastructure. I mean, I have many times ridden this and then gone, oh, let's go up to Seattle Center because it's just right there.
Right.
But people don't know that it takes you to Seattle Center, right? It's kind of amazing to me how many people don't, well, what is that? Where does it go? So, I mean, that is an opportunity, but you don't want to make it such an opportunity that it kind of spoils the natural, I don't know, you know, I don't know what the right balance is. I mean, that'll be interesting to see how that develops over time. Another question, for the section you described, Dave, of Alaskan Way, is that one street improvement permit, or will it be done in sections, or is it just one overall?
It's all one.
Okay, so I mean, I think that's good. I think it makes sense to do it that way. I think that this section of Alaska Way that you verbally described, and I know you're not there yet, but in subsequent meetings, it would be ultimately great to see just how the whole cross-section looks and works together. The bike facilities on the west end, east side, the crossing that Joel talked about, which is really complicated. So I think it'll just be really helpful for everybody, and I think the public to ultimately see what more detailed, like how is this all going to work, and how is this going to work together?
Kevin, you can join our team and be our liaison with that stuff.
Thanks, Jack. So, and then, actually, that just based my next question, which is, if this was a city project, having a project manager or deputy PM that was just doing interagency coordination and running interference would be like really critical. So, who's doing that on this project?
You know, we, it's one of the first things, good point, that we did both with the port and the city at the front end is we went to the electeds at the top, Southern here too, And, the mayor, sport commission, were head over heels. And he said, we need your attention, not just at the PM level,
Sure.
but, at your office and the directors and on the way down. And it's been super. Matt Tabano has been kind of herding people, I guess, right? We've been doing a bunch of joint meetings with Parks and SDOT, so there's good collaboration there. You guys have any?
The port has expressed interest in the collaboration with Parks and has actually said, we've always wanted an opportunity to collaborate, but now with a third party involved, it's actually easier, because we can kind of pull them together. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any one person kind of, hurting the cats, but there have been a lot of interagency conversations already, including on the permitting side.
Yeah.
Which is very important.
Imagine that's been true.
I mean, Kevin, if the great thing has been that you told us in advance that we were going to try to execute a project where we need the cooperation of SDOT and Parks and the port and BNSF simultaneously. You go, right? That's just, but it's just the cooperation has been phenomenal.
Yeah, that's great.
And potentially the Corps of Engineers.
And the Corps of Engineers.
And then my last comment is, I'm really happy to hear about the maintenance aspect because, candidly, some city projects haven't in the past always thought about the O&M side very well. I'm saying that as somebody who used to work here. And there are sections of this trail that are teeth and other body part rattling when you ride them. So some of those sections you showed in your, are those the sections that will be like the initial focus of some of the maintenance work? I mean, are there sort of pre-designated areas that, we're gonna.
Of the trails.
Of the trail,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, but I think we're probably improving or making improvements to almost the entire trail.
Yeah.
In some cases, it might be very simple asphalt overlay that fixes a crosslope issue, right? Or cleaning up an edge. And in other cases, it's like, oh, holy cow, we have a dangerous sight line and a steep bank next to the trail. And it's like, you shoot out and you're at an intersection with people coming the other way, so those are going to be the bigger moments of adjustment.
Okay, but that's great. I mean, that just that almost alone is, and that's, the last comment on this, I had the opportunity to work back in the day with Jack and others on the Expedia master plan. And that's one of the amazing things that project did was some huge trail enhancements, which are really key in that area because there were some real squeeze points there. But the other thing that project did is that it built up some of that area, but it left some of it pretty natural too. And I think that it's like finding that right balance for this is going to be, I think, really key to its success.
And that was more philanthropy,
I
that
know,
wasn't a
yeah.
permit condition, right?
Well, I remember, in fact, Jack saying at one point in that meeting with three uses, we're doing more than is required, but don't think this is a precedent. Don't think this is a precedent. So, so really exciting, and looking forward to seeing the next phase. So thanks.
Well, we have 3 minutes to go, so I will take it brief here. But I wanted to say thank you. I heard really positive things from everybody. Everybody's really excited about the design and the project, and I think the thought that goes into it. I think we have a few recommendations that I had heard for just exploration for when you come back. I know you're early in the process, so many of these might already be on your list. But I heard some recommendations for maybe more targeted outreach, especially with the Duwamish, with the Uptown Alliance, and with other, let's call them interfacing neighborhoods. There was some discussion about the silo art and projections, and I think both considering if that's an opportunity for other systems like Gates, I really love the idea that make it accessible to more people using it, not just at night, which maybe would have a cool kind of view from ships. But so I think of that as more of a program and less of a specific design. It sounded like there was folks wanted to see a continued exploration of utilities, especially white utilities, thinking around bathrooms and water in the middle of the park as much as possible. And I don't know, maybe there's even an opportunity to consider composting systems or other kind of non-water-based systems there. So maybe be creative. There was some good discussion on signage. I think Phoebe was asking that it was beyond the limits of the park itself, which I think is really important, especially on that eastern interface across the tracks. And I think it was you, Laura, that was mentioning accessibility from Seattle Center, but I think signage maybe potentially even far beyond the, and some of these key nodes to get tourists, especially into this system and out of the system, I think would be really interesting to continue to explore. There was some ideas about potentially to that signage program adding interpretive signage to tell a little bit about the story of the waterfront and its evolution over time. I guess this one went with outreach, but I think we were all impressed by the level of coordination and the smoothness of that coordination, but continued coordination with both the agencies, but as well as other planning efforts. I like the idea of trying to align a little bit with some of the future sound transit planning and other neighborhood planning. There was discussion about programming and openness. I will say I was actually rollerblading there on Tuesday.
Nice.
But I think there is something really wonderful about when you come out of downtown and enter this space that it's just all of a sudden it's open. It's amazing actually that you can decompress coming out of downtown. And I'm not aware of Chicago's waterfront park's a little bit like that, but I think it's a really special thing. So I support the idea of kind of continuing to leave this as a little bit of an open space as we consider future uses in programming. There were some ideas that we'd like to see this in section as well as the plans. The plans are really wonderful, but starting to understand the dimensions of it and maybe views of it. On lighting, I think the fixtures you had shown, I just wasn't sure if those, so on Tuesday when I was there, it was very difficult to see the trail. It was like the darker spot in the darkness. And so I think just making sure it's really lighting the path, because there's no kind of ambient lighting there at night. So not kind of face level lighting, but just trail lighting. And then I guess the final thing, this was one of my own, but the building looked like it was really large. I really love the form of it. If it doesn't have indoor programs, I guess I would encourage us to think about, and you mentioned maybe covered spaces, but not necessarily interior spaces, because those unprogrammed kind of vacant interior spaces don't really help anybody. So did I miss anything? 2:31. Thank you. We're really excited to see this back.
Right, we appreciate all your comments.
Do you have any questions for us or? I know that's part
No,
of
I don't think so. This is just perfect timing to get these comments and really a lot of insightful help.
No,
Something to go back and work with.
so wonderful just to hear, even just the topics, you know, that all of you pick up on. It's really, it makes us think more about the project. Thank you.
I think the biggest question is when does it make sense to come back to the commission, given all the regulatory hoops you're running through?
Yeah, I don't know.
And really, that, but also, I mean, I think that there's some key areas of very long projects. So I think focusing in on key knuckles or where places come together probably is the best use of the commission's time. So I think some of that is here, but let's talk about what makes sense for when you get through an initial 7-month review and you can show us things in these moments or sections. Let's talk about what that looks like.
It's fun on our side to be able to bring a project like this to you guys and see everyone smiling the whole time. You know? Not that you're not usually smiling. Thank you guys very much. This is pretty helpful.
Thank you. With that, I think we're done.
Okay.